Nina Gallagher was the kind of person people trusted with their lives. As a nurse, she worked long shifts, answered late-night calls, and showed up when others couldn't. She was dependable, predictable, the type of person who followed routines so closely that if one small thing changed, people noticed. That's why, when Nina didn't show up for work one morning, the hospital knew something was wrong. No call, no message, no explanation. Her phone rang and rang with no answer. For someone who never missed a shift, never ignored her responsibilities, and never disappeared without telling anyone where she was going, silence was terrifying. And this wasn't just a late morning. By afternoon, co-workers were calling her family. By evening, her family was calling the police. By nightfall, Nina Gallagher was officially missing. She had last been seen driving home after a shift. Same route she had taken dozens of times before. Same roads, same bridges, same quiet stretch of highways she knew by heart. But this time, she never arrived. No witnesses came forward. No crash was reported. No abandoned car was found. It was as if Nina had driven straight out of existence. Her family searched her apartment. Everything was normal. Clothes still folded. Work bag gone. Keys gone. No sign of struggle. No sign she planned to leave. No note. No warning. Investigators retraced her last known movements. They pulled phone records. They checked traffic cameras. They searched roadside hospitals, nearby towns. Flyers went up. Social media posts spread. Volunteers walked miles calling her name. Days passed, then weeks, then months. And slowly, the case everyone swore would be solved any day now began to quiet. But here's the thing about stories like this. Somewhere, there is always an answer. Sometimes it's just hidden where no one thinks to look. And sometimes it's been there the whole time. If you're drawn to real mysteries, lost stories, and the moments when truth finally comes to the surface, make sure you subscribe. Because this case doesn't fade away. It leads to a discovery that stunned investigators and changed everything her family thought they knew. This is the story of Nina Gallagher, a nurse who vanished without a trace, and the bridge no one paid attention to until it was too late. The first 48 hours after Nina Gallagher disappeared were a blur of panic, paperwork, and unanswered questions. Police started where every missing person case begins, with her routine. Nina had worked a late shift. Co-workers confirmed she clocked out tired but normal. She didn't argue with anyone. She didn't seem afraid. She didn't mention plans. She simply grabbed her things, walked to her car, and drove away. That was the last confirmed sighting. Investigators mapped her usual route home. It took her across several quiet roads, past dark stretches of trees, and over a bridge locals barely thought about anymore. Bridge 12. It wasn't a place people stopped. It wasn't a place people watched. It was just there. Police pulled traffic cameras. Some weren't working. Others were too far to clearly identify her vehicle. They checked toll records. Nothing useful. They requested phone data. Her phone last connected to a tower near her normal route, and then went silent. No movement after that. No calls. No pings. Search teams were organized. Officers drove her route again and again, slowly, scanning ditches, woods, and side roads. Volunteers joined. Flashlights cut through tall grass and tree lines. Drones were launched over open fields. Dogs were brought in to follow any scent they could find. But there were no skid marks, no broken guardrails, no debris, no signs of crash. Her car, a vehicle that should have been easy to spot, was simply gone. Hospitals were contacted. Shelters were checked. Nearby towns were notified. Her photos spread across social media. Her family gave interviews, describing Nina as responsible, caring, and deeply rooted in her life. She wouldn't just leave, they kept saying, and the evidence agreed. Her bank accounts weren't touched. Her phone stayed off. Her home showed no packing, no planning, no goodbyes. Investigators considered every possibility. Could she have pulled over somewhere? Could someone else be involved? Could she have had a medical emergency while driving? Could she have taken a different road? But without a car, without witnesses, and without physical evidence, every theory floated without an anchor. Days turned into weeks. Search areas expanded. Then they narrowed. Then they were searched again. Still nothing. And quietly, without anyone meaning for it to happen, attention shifted away from the roads and toward people. Detectives interviewed friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. They looked into her phone history, her messages, her relationships. They examined whether stress, exhaustion, or something personal might explain her disappearance. But nothing fit. No threats. No secret plans. No sudden changes. Nina's life didn't point to her vanishing. And yet, she had. Months passed. Posters faded. Tips slowed. Searches became smaller, then rarer. Her family kept looking, even when official efforts slowed. They drove her routes themselves. They walked trails. They stood on the shoulder of Bridge 12 more than once, staring down into the dark water below. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't look deep. It didn't look like a place that could hide anything. And so, it never truly became the focus. What no one realized was that the most obvious place is often the easiest to overlook. And the water beneath Bridge 12 had been keeping a secret. For a long time, Nina Gallagher's case sat in a painful place. Not active, not closed, just waiting. Her file remained open, but there were no strong leads left to chase. Detectives rotated. New officers reviewed old notes. Every so often, a tip would come in. Someone thought they saw her in another city. Someone thought they recognized her car. And every time, hope would rise, only to quietly fall again. Years passed, and then something changed. It didn't start with a confession. It didn't start with a witness. It started with a review. A newer investigator was assigned to go back through unresolved missing person cases in the area. Not to find new evidence, but to look for what might have been missed. Patterns, gaps, assumptions. When Nina's case came up, one detail kept pulling attention back. Her last known phone location, her normal route, and Bridge 12. On paper, it had always been there. But in practice, it had never truly been searched as water. Early efforts had focused on roadsides, woods, and people. The bridge itself had been checked for damage. The surrounding area had been walked. But the water below had only been glanced at, dark, calm, and assumed shallow. The new investigator didn't like assumptions. He went back to the bridge. He stood where Nina would have driven. He watched cars pass. He leaned over the railing and looked down. The water was darker than it appeared from a distance. The surface hid its depth, and the angle from the road made it almost impossible to see what lay beneath. He requested old maps, engineering plans, depth surveys. What he found immediately changed the tone of the case. The area beneath Bridge 12 wasn't shallow. It dropped suddenly. It was uneven, and over the years, sediment and plant growth had thickened, turning parts of it into a natural concealment zone. In other words, if a vehicle had entered that water, it could disappear completely. No floating debris, no visible outline, no obvious disturbance after the surface settled. The investigator brought this to his department. Discussions followed. Budget questions came up. Priority lists were debated. After all, the case was old. Resources were limited. But Nina's family never stopped pushing. They met with police. They shared their concerns. They asked again about the bridge. They asked why the water had never truly been searched. And eventually, the answer changed. Approval was given to bring in a specialized dive team equipped with sonar, technology that could scan beneath the surface, even in murky, low-visibility water. The date was set. For the first time in years, Bridge 12 was no longer just a landmark. It was a search site. Early that morning, equipment trucks arrived. Yellow tape went up. A small crowd gathered at a distance. Officers stood quietly, and Nina's family waited nearby, holding on to each other and to something they had learned to live with. Hope that hurt. The sonar unit was lowered into the water. Slowly, methodically, it began to sweep the area. At first, the screen showed what everyone expected. Mud, rocks, vegetation. Then a shape appeared that didn't belong. A long, solid outline. Too straight, too defined, too large. The operator adjusted the scan, ran it again. The image sharpened. And suddenly, no one was guessing anymore. There was something down there. Something big. Something man-made. And it was sitting directly beneath the path Nina took home. Once the sonar scan confirmed the shape, everything at Bridge 12 shifted. What had felt like a quiet review of an old case instantly became an active recovery operation. Police closed the road. Dive team members began preparing their equipment. Cameras were set. Lines were checked. The mood was no longer investigative curiosity. It was controlled urgency. Nina's family stood nearby, watching every movement. No one said what everyone was thinking, but everyone felt it. The first diver entered the water slowly. The surface barely rippled before settling back into stillness. From above, the water gave nothing away. It didn't bubble. It didn't churn. It simply closed over him, keeping it secret. Minutes passed. The sonar operator guided him using hand signals and radio communication. Down below, visibility was poor. Years of sediment, plant growth, and darkness had turned the water into a thick veil. Then the diver's voice came through. He had reached it. Not a rock, not debris. A vehicle. The outline matched exactly what sonar had shown. A car rested at an angle, partially embedded in the bottom. Plant growth had wrapped around it. Silt had built up along its sides. It had been there a long time. A second diver joined him. Together, they worked carefully, confirming what they were seeing, clearing just enough sediment to identify details. The make, the shape, the placement. When one of them located the license plate, there was no longer any doubt. It was Nina's car. The same car police had searched for across towns, highways, parking lots, and borders. The same car that had vanished without leaving a single trace. It had been beneath Bridge 12 the entire time. Above the waterline, officers exchanged quiet words. Radios carried the update. And Nina's family, though not told details, saw the change in posture, in faces, in tone. They knew. Recovery planning began immediately. A crane was requested. Rigging specialists arrived. Every step was calculated, not rushed, because after all these years, the goal was no longer just answers. It was respect. When the lifting equipment was finally positioned, cables were lowered carefully into the water. Divers secured them, double-checking every connection. The area grew silent in a way only heavy moments can create. Then slowly, the water began to move. Dark ripples spread outward. And inch by inch, something long hidden began to rise. First, the roof line broke the surface. Then the windows. Then the shape that had once carried Nina home from work. It emerged coated in mud and plant growth, barely recognizable, but undeniably a car. Her car. Officers stood still. Divers removed their gear. Onlookers watched without speaking. For years, there had been nothing to point to. Now, there was no longer any question where Nina had gone. The vehicle was secured and taken for examination. Investigators documented every detail. The condition of the car, its placement, any signs that might explain how it entered the water. They studied the road, the bridge design, the lack of barriers in certain sections, the curve leading up to it. And slowly, a picture began to form, not of disappearance, but of a tragedy that had gone unseen. When Nina Gallagher's car was finally recovered from beneath Bridge 12, the case changed forever. For years, her disappearance had lived in the space between questions and silence. Now, investigators finally had something solid to work with, not rumors, not guesses, but real evidence. Specialists examined the vehicle carefully. They looked at how it rested on the bottom. They studied the road above, the curb before the bridge, the limited lighting in that area, and a lack of strong barriers at the time she vanished. What they found pointed not toward foul play, but toward a quiet, devastating accident. There were no signs that anyone had followed her. No evidence of another vehicle forcing her off the road. No indication she had stopped. The most likely conclusion was the simplest, and often the hardest to accept. Late at night, after a long shift, on a familiar road, Nina's car had left the bridge and entered the water in a way that produced no obvious crash scene. No debris remained on the road. No broken rail drew attention. The dark water below absorbed everything, the sound, the motion, and eventually the truth. Once the surface stilled, there was nothing to see. And so, a place people crossed every day quietly held what search teams never thought to look for. For Nina's family, the discovery brought two emotions at once. Grief, because the outcome they feared was now real. And relief, because the not knowing was finally over. They no longer had to imagine endless possibilities. They no longer had to wonder if she was out there, lost and waiting. They no longer had to search every unfamiliar face. They had answers. They could bring her home. They could say her name without a question mark attached to it. And they could finally begin the long, difficult process of healing. Nina Gallagher was no longer just missing. She was found. Her story now stands as a reminder of something haunting and important. That sometimes the truth isn't far away. It's just hidden where no one thinks to look. Beneath calm water. Beneath routine paths. Beneath everyday places we stop seeing. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you how precious and fragile life is, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps more people find these stories. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring real mysteries, real investigations, and the human stories behind them. And I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. Backhand index pointing right, what was the moment in this case that stayed with you the most? Your thoughts matter. Your voice matters. And every comment keeps these stories and the people behind them from ever being forgotten